Hi, thanks for joining Law for Doctors. Today is our Christmas special, and if we had to give it a title, which we will call it I'll Be Home for Christmas. We're going to talk about 3 things that you need to know, that your patients need to know and be prepared for if they're unable to go home for Christmas because they're in the ER. So today we have with us Dr. Ephraim Makuve with Hutano Physical Therapy. He's had a lot of experience with his patients. We're helping patients who are in the ER. So we want to share the 3 things that patients need to be prepared for. So Dr. Makuve, thanks for joining the show today.
Well, thank you very much. I guess what I would like to share is, like you said, the 3 things that are really important for people to know before they get themselves in the ER or they end up in a situation where they're unwillingly in the ER. The first thing is obviously your rights as a patient. What do you need to know about what kind of treatments you can get in the ER, and can you opt out of those treatments? The second thing is directives that you give folks who may be your neighbors or relatives on who's going to take care of your kids or who's going to take care of your pets, anybody who might be left behind while you're in the hospital. And then the last thing that we're going to discuss is trying to figure out for that patient what is the best scenario for them at the end of their stay in terms of where they're going to go. Is it home? Are they going to go to a skilled nursing facility, or are they going to be in the hospital for a prolonged period of time? These are the questions that I kind of run into a lot of times in my practice.
Right, and I know just even going on Google or just experience from just life, you do hear people say, if I get in the hospital, can I leave? Am I stuck here? What are my options here? So have you experienced that?
Yeah, it's a very common thing that we run into. Once people get into an ambulance, there's a process that happens. So for starters, you cannot just get out of the ambulance. You have to be taken to the ER. Once you get into the ER, there's a protocol that the hospital has to take into account. They have to take care of that patient according to the diagnosis that they've come up with that patient. In essence, any patient has the absolute authority to say they do not want any treatment and they can leave. That's called against medical advice. If your physician in that emergency room says that you need to be admitted and you choose not to be admitted, we call that against medical advice, and you would have to sign a waiver that says, I'm leaving against medical advice. So yes, any patient can leave at any time.
Right. And from the physician's perspective too, getting that against medical advice waiver is something that's really important as far as a medical malpractice situation goes. You don't want to be releasing people and nothing's documented to show that you told them they should stay and get certain treatment, because if they leave and they don't get the treatment, you can't show that you gave them the advice. It's not going to be a good situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't practice medicine. I'm a physical therapist, but all physicians are very, very cognizant of the fact that every patient that walks into that hospital, if they choose not to get any treatment, they have to sign that waiver. Because yes, it is something that will come back on the hospital or on the physician as something they have to disclose to the patient, that this is what's necessary for them to be treated, but they've chosen not to go that route, and therefore it's upon them if something were to happen as soon as they walk out of the doors of the hospital.
Right. And you know what I'm going to do for people who are listening to the show, if you're interested, on our show notes, I'm going to post a sample against medical advice form. So if you want to check out and see what it looks like, sample form, you'd be welcome to download it there. So just keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anything else you want to cover on that first issue?
I think that's, really before anyone gets into an ambulance, that's and sometimes we don't have an option to really think through things because you may be unconscious and you just happen to be picked up by the EMTs at that point. But before a person gets into an ambulance, I think most people don't really get to think about what they're signing themselves into. There are financial obligations that are associated with riding in that ambulance. There are financial obligations associated with being in the emergency room and getting those initial tests. even though you decide you refuse the care, if you so choose to refuse the care, you still may have obligations to reimburse the people that have been involved in your care up to that point. So again, it's not just as simple as, I changed my mind, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm just going to walk away from this. There are some things that people really need to think through before they get into that ambulance. And granted, any emergency is not something that anybody plans for, but once you get in that ambulance and you're going to the hospital, you definitely want to make sure that you understand what's entailed from that point on.
Right, and that does remind me too, another issue with going against medical advice that I've heard, not seen, is that if you do go against medical advice, it could have some negative repercussions on insurance coverage with Medicaid or even private insurance.
So again, not being an insurance expert at this, this is something that many patients have told me that they would rather stick around in the hospital against their own conscience, because they are afraid that there will be repercussions from an insurance company not paying for the entire visit just because the patient decided to leave against medical advice. So again, I always say to my patients, it's important for them to read through their policies, check with their insurance company, what are the, if any, what are the stipulations of their hospital stay? Are there any conditions for them to stay in the hospital as long as the physicians say they need to stay there, or are they going to be penalized for leaving too early?
Right. And that's definitely, it would behoove the patient to ask questions, get information. If they need to have questions about insurance, get on the phone, talk to your insurer and see what your options are and what will happen if you take a certain course of action.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So then the other, I'm going to move on to number 2, because I think
Sure.
that's kind of an interesting balance between, I feel like I need to stick around so that I don't have to pay for all of this, but also I've got 2 dogs at home, and who's going to take care of them?
So that's probably a situation that I get involved in a lot more than I ever imagined I would get involved in. Many folks end up in the hospital. They've gone through the emergency room process and they end up getting admitted in the hospital for maybe an extended period of time. It could be hours, it could be days. And they come to the realization, well, they have a pet at home. And they don't have anyone to take care of the pet. And it may be as simple a problem as the pet hasn't gone to relieve himself outside for hours, or there hasn't been no food in the house for the pet for a number of hours. And there just is no mechanism that they had put in place for either a neighbor, a relative, or somebody to go out there and take care of that particular pet, causing more stress on a patient that already has enough stress dealing with the ailment that brought them to the hospital in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Of course, we did talk about medical directives. For those who don't know, medical directives are actually created by statute, and there's a certain form that you have to follow, and you can go literally copy it out of the statute and kind of put what you want in there. But in your personal experience, do you see a lot of people have medical directives, or they more people don't, or what have you seen? Not being very familiar with the statistics of how many people do, but I do run into several folks who are in a very ill state, and they are starting to ask those questions that you would have hoped they would have asked maybe several years ago, documents that they should have put in place many years ago. Once in a while, unfortunately, we do experience families that are at trying to figure out how to maneuver through the legal system at a point when their loved one is not in a position to make some of those decisions at that particular point. So again, coming back to the fact that a lot of people, when in good health, we're not paying attention to some of the things that could happen when you're in somewhat of compromised health, but more importantly, when you are not capable of making those decisions that you would, or at least giving a directive on how you'd want matters to be managed while you're incapacitated, so to speak. Right. And the same thing goes for just planning a will. People don't want to think about what's going to happen if I pass away, or what's going to happen if I can't make a decision on my own. Those are the types of tough questions that it's good to sit down and do that at some point in your life.
Absolutely.
Sooner the better.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I always tell my patients that, we don't put seatbelts on because we plan on getting into an accident.
Right.
We just do it just in case,
Right.
we end up in an accident. But that's really the scenario that we run into more times than we would like to deal with as healthcare workers.
Right. So now let's move on to the third issue, which is how do we decide when a patient is there in the ER, what's the best thing for them when it comes time for them to leave?
So when patients come into the emergency room, obviously there's a reason why they ended up there. We'll take a case of somebody who's fallen, for example, and broke a hip. The hospital is mandated to make sure that that person goes back to a safe environment. Safe environment is defined by a number of parameters. If they live by themselves and they have a house with stairs, for example, we want them to be able to demonstrate that they can walk and they can go up and down stairs before they leave that hospital. If they're incapable of doing that at the end of their hospital stay, then we have to figure out a place for them to go that's going to be safe. And that could be a rehab facility where they could get stronger and gain that ability to go up and down the stairs and walk so that they can go back home and be safe. Or they could go to a skilled nursing facility where, again, they get some nursing help and they also get some rehabilitation help. All these decisions are being made dynamically. As the patient is getting better or getting worse, we are trying to just move the target and try to figure out what is the best place for this patient to go to. Now, most patients are not familiar with the process of discharging, and especially the hospital's priority in making sure that they go to a safe environment. So most people will tell you, I want to go home as soon as possible. And we are sitting there going, well, home is not the safest place for you to go right now. We would rather you go somewhere where you're safe, and that always brings out a point of contention between healthcare providers and the patient who truly believes that they can go home and live independently. But as the hospital, we're also sitting there going, if something were to happen to this patient and we discharge them into an environment where they try to go up the stairs and ended up breaking both legs, we could be liable for that. So there are many legal connotations that go with the decision-making process that we make. But at the end of the day, the patient ends up sometimes looking at the healthcare professional system and not understanding why we are literally holding them against their will, either in a hospital or sending them to a facility that they would rather not be in, so to speak.
Right. So as a healthcare professional, what are some of the questions you'd think that a patient should be asking themselves if they are trying to decide, should I go home or should I go to a skilled care facility?
So in most cases, and this really does affect my practice because I'm directly involved in deciding, who's able to walk safe distances, who's able to go up and down stairs, and those kinds of things, functional abilities that are required for them to go back home and live in a safe environment. The questions that most people have not answered, or the thought process that has not happened with most of my patients who are frustrated with the system, is they have not contacted a family member or have somebody close by that they can say, hey, just in case I end up incapacitated, could you come and make some meals for me? Sometimes it's just as simple as somebody that can cook for them, or somebody that can get them in the house as soon as they get out of the hospital ambulance or they get out of a taxi. Somebody that can help them get up and down the stairs. Most people don't go up and down the stairs more than 4 times in their own homes. So it's not a very complicated problem. With just a little bit of help, and definitely much less expensive help than you would get, say, from going to a rehab facility or a skilled nursing facility, you can accomplish the same purpose and end up with a patient who is very comfortable in their own home, which I believe is the best place for people to recover anyways.
Right.
And then we can always send home health agencies to come out there and help them with getting better so that they can become as independent as possible.
Right, and I'm sure, home is the best place because it's where they want to be anyway. So
Absolutely.
it's where they're going to be healthier on a holistic level.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So the main message I guess I would be getting from this conversation is, if I'm a patient, I need to be prepared. I need to give it some advanced thought to what is going to happen, who is going to be there to help me, who can I ask, who's going to be around, So those types of things you can plan for, you can prepare for, and you can have conversations with your family and friends and professionals to make sure everything's in line.
Absolutely. And I think living in a tourist environment like this, we get a lot of people who are not necessarily, this transcends age. We run into folks who are in their 20s that moved out here and they don't have family, they don't have any friends yet, and they haven't established themselves in the community. Something happens to them, and the only people they can rely on are parents who are 4 or 5 states away. The same questions will still apply, and the same scenarios will still bring the same problems to anybody at any age. However, it does become more difficult as people age more, and the ability to return back to normal function is a lot less than, say, somebody who's in their 20s. That's where we see most folks really struggle. They have that one son that lives, in California or Arizona. It's going to be a few days before they can get out here and take care of the business that needs to be taken care of. In the meantime, the patient has a pet at home, or they have another loved one at home who cannot take care of themselves. That does become an issue. So, like you said, preparation is really the key. By far, people just need to ask those questions. They need to talk to neighbors. They need to talk to their relatives and say, just in case something happens to me, if you could help me in this area, that would be great.
Right. And obviously you're here today sharing this message because it's something that you want your patients to know. You want your people to know that they can go to their healthcare providers and express their concerns, and the healthcare providers are actually there to provide health care for people in the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if someone wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I am, my office is up on 215 and Flamingo. If they want to get a hold of me, they can call me. My phone number at the office is 702-530-1557. Or they can go to my website. It's www.hutano.com. That's HUTANO.com. They could just email me, Dr. Makuve at hutano.com.
Awesome. And you're also moving into the Henderson area.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's awesome. That's where we are. So.
That sounds good.
Cool. So also, I'm going to be putting a little article together for physicians on some of the best practices when you do have to do an against medical advice waiver. So that'll be on the show notes as well. In the meantime, I hope that no one has to spend Christmas away from home, that especially in the ER, and have a Merry Christmas.